Before we get into the stories, I'm excited to announce I have a new channel called Monster Trail Cams. Here's a quick trailer for my new channel. The link is below. Monster Trail Cams is your ticket to the unseen and supernatural. Sourced from a vast network of mystery hunters worldwide, our channel reveals a collection of strange creatures and supernatural events that will leave you on the edge of your seat. From shadowy figures lurking in dense forests to inexplicable entities prowling under the cloak of night, each chilling clip peels back another layer of the world's untold mysteries. We release new episodes several times a week. Okay, now let's get to the stories. My story starts with a regular cat, but I promise you it gets weird really quick. Stormy is the cat, and she belongs to my mother. She just showed up at our door a couple years ago like she belonged there, and of course Mom let her in. Oh, before I go on, I should tell you we live in Grawn, Michigan, which is a pretty small town, less than 1,000 people. There are mostly woods around us. And we have to go to Traverse City, which is just under an hour away if we want anything, really. Stormy the cat is kind of old now, so she doesn't go outside much. She sits on top of a bookshelf on a pillow Mom put there for her and looks out the window at the woods. It's like the window is her TV. Most of the time, she's pretty quiet unless she feels the need to yowl at a squirrel or something. But one night in the fall, I was sitting near the fireplace reading when I heard her make a noise I never heard before. It was like between a yowl and a shriek. I looked over at her and I thought she was having a seizure. She hissed and spit and got herself so worked up she fell off the shelf. I was all ready to take her to the emergency vet in Traverse City, but she picked herself and walked away from the window like she was fine. She didn't get back up on her shelf until the next morning, though. A few nights later, it happened again, but this time, I figured out that she was hissing at something outside the window. I went to look, but there's no outside lights on that side of the house. No reason to have them there since it's just the woods behind. I couldn't see anything in that window except my own reflection and Stormy freaking out. She seemed more focused this time, like if she hissed enough at whatever it was, she could scare it off. I went out the back door with a flashlight and shone it around, but I didn't see anything. The next day, I went out there and I saw some deer tracks. Except they were weird, set next to each other as if the deer had been standing on two legs. That made no sense, so I figured it was just that some of the hooves didn't dig in deep enough to make a mark. I decided to go over to old George's house, the neighbor next door, and ask him if he'd seen or heard anything strange. I figured probably he'd say no, and the cat was just freaked out by a wolf or a coyote. Thing is, we'd had Stormy for years, and there were always wolves and coyotes around, and she'd never acted like this before. This was new. Old George lives alone since his wife passed away. He's not a man who has any truck with superstitions or that kind of thing. He was a lumberman before he retired and spent a lot of time in the woods. You know, like a man's man kind of guy. I figured if anyone would know if there were strange creatures out there, it would be him. I walked over and found him splitting wood behind his house like he was 20 years old and not 68. He put down the axe when he saw me coming and said, "You hear about the wendigo?" "What's that?" I asked. "The Ojibwe know about him." "That's where I heard about it," old George said. "He been hanging around lately. I figured you knew that." "I don't know anything," I told him. "All I know is Mom's cat is freaking out because something's outside her window at night." "It's the wendigo," he said, "looking for something to eat, but not a cat." "So what do I do? How do I get rid of it?" I asked him. I could hardly believe I was actually acting like what he said was true, but I'd never known old George to lie or tell stories. He's just not that kind of guy. "Come inside," George said. His house is like you'd expect. Wood-burning stove, old farmer's almanacs, and a few Native American blankets thrown over the old wooden furniture. He opened his cupboard and got out a worn leather bag. "When the wendigo comes again, open this bag and toss it at it. Don't open it before that." I reluctantly took the bag from him but agreed to do what he said. Back home, I didn't tell Mom about all this because I didn't want to scare her. She's pretty sick these days, and mostly just stays in her room. But I hung on to the bag and waited. A few nights later, I was sitting in the living room reading as usual when Stormy started to do her thing. She was hissing and spitting, staring out that window where I could see nothing. When I started to go outside, she followed right at my heels. I was sure to have that bag right with me and ready. As soon as we stepped out the door, Stormy let out a yowl like a tomcat in heat. I squinted into the dark and saw something that looked like red eyes at the edge of the wood. I swung Mom's big flashlight in that direction, and I almost dropped it when I saw exactly what George said was out there, the wendigo. That thing was like a rotting deer standing on its back legs, but more than just rotting, it was like a zombie from the movies. Fur and flesh like dripped off it. The skull poked through the half-rotten skin of its face, and it seemed like it was grinning at me. It didn't make a sound, but somehow I knew from the looks of it that it wanted to eat me. The wind must have shifted just then because I caught the horrible smell of death, like that time Stormy killed a mouse and it died under the refrigerator and Mom and I didn't find it for a week. I wasn't sure I could throw the bag far enough, but I had to try. I loosened the drawstring and cocked my arm back just like I was throwing a baseball. I let it go and it flew right toward those red eyes. I swear I just blinked and the thing was gone. I wasn't taking any chances though, and I scooped up Stormy and ran back into the house with her. She hopped back up onto her pillow at the window, but now she was acting like a normal cat, just looking out the window with her tail flicking back and forth. The next morning, I went out to retrieve the bag for George and see what was in it. But the bag had also completely disappeared. I have no idea if it disappeared with the wendigo or if something or someone came and took it after the fact. All George will say about it is, that's just the way it works, and I'm not really interested in pressing him for any further details. Basically, I'm just happy that the wendigo hasn't been back. Maybe old George's voodoo bag worked. I think the government's doing all kinds of stuff they don't want us to know about. Honestly, I don't know if I'd believe it as much, except that it's happening right down the street. See, I live just outside Billings, Montana, and about a half-mile down from me is this old abandoned factory. At least I thought it was abandoned. I've been here for 10 years or so, and for the last 9, nothing's gone on there. Just a hulking structure with busted-out windows, crumbling brick, probably rats too. Can't tell what it used to be since the sign is long gone. Maybe sugar processing or something like that. It's made of brick, and it's 4 stories tall with a bunch of pretty big windows, smokestacks on top, land around it for a ways, and then cornfields. So anyway, last fall, someone came and built a fence around it. Chain link with concertina wire on top, like you see on prison buildings. Seemed like that fence appeared overnight. I thought that was weird, but it was hopefully that someone was planning to fix it up. But winter went by, and nothing changed, at least nothing I could see. I couldn't figure it out and started to wonder, who puts a big fence like that around a building no one's using? Then spring came, and someone came and bricked up all the windows. I didn't think that much of it. After all, most of the windows were broken. I really didn't know why they didn't just tear it down, though instead, seems like it'd be a safety hazard. I guess it's in the middle of nowhere, sort of, but still. Mine is one of only a few houses around it. Probably used to be more houses around when the factory was operating. Soon after the windows were bricked up, cars started coming and going from the building, coming in through an automatic gate that was installed in the chain link fence. Nondescript cars. Nothing you'd remember or notice. I still didn't think about it that much, except that around the same time that the work started there, my cell phone stopped working. Like calls would drop for no reason. Other times I couldn't call out at all. What's really weird is that if I drove just a few blocks away, my phone worked fine. It actually took a few weeks for me to put 2 and 2 together on this connection with my phone and the building. But once I did, I couldn't get it out of my mind. So I decided to get out an old shortwave radio my dad left me when he passed. It's a blocky metal thing that weighs about 100 pounds. Kind of fun to play around with because you can hear stations really far away and sometimes even pick up other strange signals. I hadn't done it in a while, but I decided to fire it up. Usually just catch the same few stations, but this time I heard something I never had before. It was garbled, but loud. The signal was so strong that it had to be close by, which was super freaky. I listened for a while, but I couldn't make heads nor tails of it. It wasn't any language I recognized. Seemed like I'd catch a word here and there and then just junk again. The next day, my phone started doing something even weirder. I'd be on a call and then start to hear something else at the same time. In the background, like when you get two radio signals at once. I called the phone company, but they said there was nothing wrong with my service. They didn't know any reason for either the calls not going through or the weird background noise. They hadn't heard of anything like that. I then went back and listened to the radio station again. I wanted to compare it to the noises on my phone, and it really sounded the same as the phone. Same deep voice speaking gibberish. I was starting to get freaked out. I decided to walk by the factory and see if anything was new or stood out to me. When I got there, I peered through the new fence and thought I could see something behind the building and decided to try to check it out. I walked off the road, went around the building, following that fence to the back. I was definitely scared that whoever was in there would see me, but I planned to just say I was looking for my lost dog or something. When I got around the corner, I saw way behind the factory a large metal structure. Something that looked like satellite dishes, for TV, only bigger. I wasn't able to get a good look, though, because a guy who looked like a security guard standing closer to the building started walking toward me, fast. But he wasn't saying anything. I hightailed it out of there and headed back home, although I took the long way around. I didn't want him to have any inkling of the direction I lived in. Once back home, I decided I'd look up the place on Google Earth, see if I could find satellite images of the top of it. I typed in my address and moved down the street. Nothing. I checked again, thinking maybe I had got something mixed up. But I did properly have Billings at the top of the screen, where it should be. But all I saw in the images was my house, and all the other places nearby, and cornfields. No factory. I Googled factories in Billings and got pictures of a few refineries and sugar beet factories, but not the one near my house. I couldn't find a picture of it anywhere. It was like it didn't exist. The next day, I turned on my shortwave radio again, but the loud station with the garbled voice was gone. And coincidentally, or not, my cell phone started working fine again. A few days later, I drove by the factory as slowly as I could convince myself was safe, and there weren't any cars there anymore. I then took a chance at being seen and circled toward the back of the building. I didn't see the huge metal dishes anymore. I didn't see the security guard this time either, and I wondered if they moved the dishes because of me. Did they take out the whole operation just because of me over there looking and asking then phone company questions? There's no way I could have mattered that much. Anyway, the place looked pretty deserted. No cars, no people. It was as if I had imagined it all. Over the next week, they brought in a huge wrecking ball and tore the building down. Hauled away every last brick. But they left up the fence. Big chain-link concertina wire fence around. Nothing. I'm now convinced that it was a secret government facility, and they were communicating with someone or something secret. Aliens? Another country? Russia? I don't know. It was January, the start of the spring semester, and some friends of mine were throwing this huge party to welcome everyone back. I was having a great time, honestly, for the majority of the night. Something that I noticed early on, when I had first arrived, was that there was garbage scattered all across the front yard. All the trash bags and cans have been toppled over and torn into. Obviously, I assumed this was because of some animal, but it was actually insane how much trash was scattered about. I mention this because not only was the yard of the frat house trashed, but so were the yards of nearly every other adjacent house on the block. It seemed like whatever was messing with the garbage was big and hungry. Coming from a rural area myself, we had a lot of times where we had an unwelcome stay from a family of raccoons, or even the occasional bear. But it was never as bad as the way that block looked, so much so that everyone I was with that day commented on it too. And then, that was the last I thought of it. Until later. A few hours later, around midnight, I went out on the back porch for a smoke with my friends. That's when I noticed that the porch reeked like urine, and something else I couldn't put my finger on. I assumed someone partied too hard and peed on the porch as a joke or something. I don't know, I couldn't think of any reason other than that. We're out there for a little while when all of a sudden we hear a yell coming from the opposite side of the yard, from the front of the house. It takes me a second to register what the hell is going on, but my friends run back inside to try and see what the fuss is about. So there I am, alone on the porch, with no idea about the impending weird stuff I'm about to witness. I hear a distant conversation yelling, but I'm not paying too much attention to it. I'm just sort of looking out into the yard. Then I see it run by. Coming from the front of the house is a creature that is big, massive even, and sprinting fast as hell. In fact, it was so quick that at first I didn't have a slight idea what it even looked like, only that it was speeding right through the yard, and it was big. Then it stops. It stops right near the edge of the yard, where the forest starts. It sits there for a moment, and even though it's dark, I managed to finally get a decent look at it. It was some kind of wolf, dog, man combination. Just the grossest thing you could imagine, sitting there on all fours and frothing at the mouth. I choked. It scared the crap out of me, and I just choked on my cigarette with the loudest, most obnoxious cough you've ever heard. This was, of course, a huge mistake. The wolf creature snaps its head towards me, and now we're making eye contact. I thought I was going to die, honestly. My nerves were shot. I just kept hoping that maybe someone would come back outside to check on me or something. I wanted to yell, but I knew that if I did, it would probably set this thing off somehow, so I kept quiet. As I'm looking at it, the freakiest thing happens. This wolf, it gets up and it stands on its hind legs, still staring. Now I really think I'm losing my mind because as big as I thought it was before, now the thing is standing at least 7 feet in the air. Taller than me, taller than any person I've ever been next to. It was so confusing to look at, really. But I wasn't so messed up that I didn't know what I was seeing. I could tell this wasn't normal. It had these crazy eyes, like glowing human eyes on a dog-like head. I told you already about how tall the thing was, but it wasn't just tall, it was also jacked. It's odd. Human torso was insanely muscular, which explains how it moved around so quickly, I suppose. I just didn't fully comprehend its anatomy. Even the human parts had fur, and even the animal parts looked vaguely human-shaped. We just sat there for a moment, looking at each other. I stood as still as I possibly could, and as boring as that might sound, it worked. Eventually, I won the staring match, and the monster thing just sort of became bored, I think, lost interest in me. It turned around and ran straight into the woods without so much as a second glance. I will never forget that thing, its eyes, the novelty of it all. I was sitting on the porch sipping on some coffee. I'm a big fan of coffee and just got this new type I've been wanting to try for a while. Anyways, I'm looking up at the sky and I noticed this dark dot. It wasn't moving. It just looked like a black dot in the sky. I was racking my brain trying to figure out what it could be. Was it a helicopter? Was it a drone? Was it a satellite? I finished my cup of coffee, so I went and fixed myself another cup and didn't give the dot another thought. About an hour later, I got another cup and sat down on the porch again. I looked up in the sky, and in the same location, the dot was still there. I went inside and grabbed my telescope and pointed it in the direction of the dot. Once I was able to focus on it, I noticed it was something metallic that was spinning and glowing blue. It was too far away to make out exactly what it was, but I was certain it was something out of the ordinary. Maybe the government was testing out some sort of new aircraft. I watched it for about 15 more minutes, and I noticed it started getting bigger, which meant it was getting closer. It kept getting closer and closer until I could make out the details of the aircraft. It was a large metallic disc that spun around, and the blue glow came from jagged lines that covered the bottom of the aircraft. They sort of looked like symbols, but not from any language I recognize. The disc kept getting closer and closer to me until I could start making out the details of the ship with the naked eye. The closer it got to me, the eerier it felt. This thing turned out to be massive, and I was seriously starting to question the motive of this thing flying around this area. I live in New Hampshire, and I'm about an hour from the nearest town. There's barely anybody that lives around me, and I'm not the biggest advocate of being monitored by the government. And if this is an alien UFO, I'd rather blast it out of the sky than be abducted by it. It got even closer to me, and it sounded pretty frightening. It sounded like a cross between a train and a refrigerator. The closer it got, the louder it got, until it was far too close for comfort. I went inside and grabbed my sniper rifle and aimed up at the giant spacecraft. At this point, the sound was so loud I couldn't hear myself think, and it started hurting my ears. It hovered directly over my property and started coming down to the ground. I fired a shot off as a warning, but it kept on coming closer. I fired another one right at the sucker, and it ricocheted off like it was nothing. I shot all the ammo I had in the gun, and it didn't deter this thing in the least. The sound was becoming more and more unbearable, and I ran into my house and locked the door. I grabbed my shotgun and peered out the window as this thing got closer and closer to the ground. All of a sudden, the spacecraft opened up and a bunch of black figures started falling to the ground. I panicked, ran upstairs, opened the hatch, and crawled up the ladder into the attic. I locked the attic hatch and sat there pointing my shotgun at it. My heart was pounding, and I was preparing to go out with a fight. I heard the doors bust open, windows smashed in, and the sound of hurrying footsteps all over the house. I tried to breathe as quietly as I could, trying not to give away my position. Something pulled at the attic hatch aggressively, and I prepared to blast it to smithereens. Then it stopped trying, and I just listened to all the fast footsteps throughout the house. All those things were running vigorously around the house, and the whole time not one of them said a word. I was seriously disturbed. Finally, the footsteps just left into the distance, and I heard the ship's noise outside slowly fade to silence. I probably waited up there for another 2 hours, and after not hearing anything else, I decided to come out and check things out. I unlocked the hatch, opened it up, and aimed down. I didn't see anything, so I opened the ladder up and climbed down as silently as I could. When I got down, I saw my coffee cup, sniper rifle, telescope, and family picture placed directly underneath the hatch. It was like they were sending a message that they knew I was up there. I checked the entire house and didn't see any of them. Those things broke all my doors and windows, sent a disturbingly cryptic message, and left everything else completely untouched. What the hell just happened to me? I called the police, and they came and told me that it was probably some kids playing a prank. When I told them what I saw, they just told me to be careful and left. I feel so violated, and I want revenge for the trauma these things have caused me and financial restitution for all my broken property. It's going to cost me an arm and a leg to fix everything, and I'm living off disability on a very tight budget. How can I ever sleep again, knowing that those things could just come again from the sky at any given moment?